Hello, my name is Nasmin Valera,
My name is Danny Carrillo.
and I read Medical Bondage.
I read Heavy by Kiese Laymon.
Perfect. Can you tell me about your book?
So my book was an American memoir, which is in the title.
Mm-hmm.
It is just a collection of really hard times that Kiese Laymon has, and he invents a lot of um, American um, disparities that happen. A lot of it is his perspective, and some of it is even how he thought he's seen things,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a huge collection of just thoughts and perspectives just accumulated over years. And so
Okay.
like this book wasn't just made in like a year or so. It was made over
Oh.
like a good decade. Um, so Keith Lamon just sees several um, American disparities, like racial disparities in America, and so he comments on that. So that's what the gist of my book is.
Mm.
Could I hear a little bit about yours?
Yes. So Medical Bondage, it was very. I learned a lot. I learned things that I never really thought were like possible, and it was very mind blowing. So my book was pretty much about the fact that in the 19 1908, I believe. So like Congress banned Africans. So like Congress banned the African slave trade,
Okay.
and then that kind of worried slave owners because like they knew that like they couldn't get any more slaves, so they had to take care of the ones that they had, so, which led them to just take care of the reproductive side of just like of reproduction in general of the slaves. So they wanted to make sure that the slave women were healthy enough to give birth to children into like slavery and then just like keep the cycle going pretty much. So then doctors like Dr. Sims, he he had to deal with slave owners, and he kind of like borrowed slaves. I mean, he he borrowed slave women to just like experiment with them to just improve reproduction. And then these women they were like experimented on while while they were also being nurses and assistants during these procedures. And it was just like mind blowing the fact that like all of these procedures like they were like performed without anesthesia, where like right now like they cannot perform them without anesthesia. And it was just like mind blowing, just like disheartening to see that that's. I mean like it was a good outcome, but it was just like a really bad process to get
So I'd like to further the conversation with saying, did you find any connections between your book and maybe Flipgrid resources, something that we learned in class, or even to my book, or even something that you could relate to
I felt like
yourself?
our books they were very different but yet similar, because like both books talk about just like the like inequalities within race and like between races, and it's just like, I mean, if you really think about it, it's, I mean, we would like to think that these inequalities are not happening right now, but we tell ourselves that it's not happening or that like it's not as bad. But like if you really read into it, like it's still happening, but just like it's so embedded in the system that like we like it's if it's sometimes it's hard to see.
Right, you're kind of just accustomed to it. You know, that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything you want to add to like how we grew up on it? Is it just something that is how it is? And do you think, is there any possible way that we could change it?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
I believe like the first step towards change and like towards like permanent change is just acknowledging that it's going on, because like I mean like we can acknowledge it now because like we both know that it happens, but I feel like there's still people out there that choose to ignore it because like they don't want to deal with it and like they don't want to have like the difficult conversations.
Mhm.
So like as soon as everyone just like recognizes that it's going on, then we can just like move forward and like together just like figure out a way to acknowledge it and just like counteract.
Okay, I definitely agree with what you were trying to say there. I think
Mhm.
acknowledging is the first step. I think the hardest part is really just being able to realize that our medicine and most of the medicine and the early conventions of medicine were just used, were made up from like the suffrage of not just women but also like slaves, you
Yeah.
know. And so most of our medicine is like built on the backs
Mhm.
and the sacrifices on African Americans. And I think that's important to acknowledge, especially in medicine, where everyone needs it.
Mhm.
I definitely see connections with my book and some of the flip group readings. Kanti, as you said even before when you were talking about your book, when the author added some names.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember one of the resources talked about how an earthquake happened, and it wasn't just shocking. It was only shocking because they started seeing the story from one person's point of view,
Mhm.
and so someone was able to describe death through, through their experience instead of just statistics and numbers of casualties. And so I think that's very important to acknowledge as well. Someone's story is much more important than just numbers.
Yeah. If I had to pinpoint just like the main purpose of my book,
Mm.
it would be the fact that my author is trying to shine the spotlight on the women that put, no, on the women that were forced to put their time and their bodies through like all of these gruesome experiences,
Okay.
and the fact that Dr. Sims is given the title of the father of gynecology, and like yeah, like sure, like he's the father because like he's the one who like performed all these procedures, and like she's not trying to take away from that, but she's just trying to say, oh, like this man did this, but he was able to do all of this because of these women that had no, I mean, they had no choice in the matter. Like it was just like, just go, and like they had to go, or like they would just face like awful consequences. So my author's purpose is just to just highlight and just to make sure that the lives that were not lost in vain, and that people like remember these people.
Wow.
What was the purpose of your book? Well, what do you feel was the purpose of your book?
I think Kiese Laymon tried to hit a lot of points
Mm-hmm.
during his book. Many of them were to show the audience a little bit of what he went through,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of it wasn't written towards just a general audience. A lot of it was written to his grandmother and to his mother, and so that was something I found very interesting, was because some of the subtext and even some of the text were obvious that he would switch from character to character, and so I think his purpose would be let's see. I want to read it off.
You can read it off.
I wrote this down, so.
Okay, yeah, you go ahead. You can read it. You can read it.
What I came up with was Heavy an American Memoir by Kiese Laymon. Is an elaborate timeline of perspectives of growth of a character
Mm-hmm.
of Kiese Laymon.
Yeah.
Through events that shadow American problems, things like racial divide, sexual violence, child abuse, wealth disparity, segregation, and the effects of emotional turmoil, which was because of all those,
Mm-hmm.
latter effects. Through Kiese Laymon's eyes, we see disparities in race and the huge gap between black and white, because a lot of times he talked about the dilution of education, credibility and strength, independence and value, due to his mother being a black woman.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that through his book. He lets us peek through like a keyhole to see that our perception of how we Americans see race and culture now is much different,
Mm-hmm.
because compared to your book as well, it's much different to how it was back then, but it's still not very different.
Yeah.
And so I think that was his purpose, was to make his audience look at how things haven't really changed They're just a little more passive.
Do you feel like the things that happen in your book are still happening right now, and like we just don't see it or just choose to not acknowledge it?
Definitely. I think too many times we blame, race, and when the obvious should be, we should be looking at our consequences. We play the race card. Well, I play the race card a little bit too much than I should. That's because I'm used to like hearing that on the news. I'm used to hearing my parents say it to me. But sometimes it's just because of what I did and what I should be using. It shouldn't be the race card. Like Kiese Laymon starts talking about in his book, it should be about looking at the bigger picture. It's not just about winning the small battles, but about winning the war for the rest of like the people behind you that you're trying to support. So it's definitely going on in the modern day, but we're not helping the case. Well, I'm not helping the case by throwing my race, orientation, creed, or whatever as an excuse, or even a makeup for something that isn't really there. So, yeah. What do you think? Do you think the effects of your book are still continuing today?
Something that really stood out to me was the fact that I was kind of familiar with the topic of my book from before, because I followed sports, and I read about what happened to the greatest of all time, Serena Williams.
Yeah.
I read a lot of articles about it because it just opened my eyes towards an issue that has been going on for years and that I wasn't aware of until a woman of her caliber went through it. And it was really shocking to me, her experience, and I really like the fact that after it happened to her, she shone light on it. She was like, this is what happened, and like this is what I had to go through because of my race. And thank God she was educated on the topic, and like she knew what was going on, because if she hadn't told her doctors what to do, she would not be alive today. And it's like scary to think that there's so many women out there that this could happen to, and they have no idea about it.
And that's a very important thing to say, because Serena, people wouldn't think that someone as athletic and someone as healthy as Serena Williams,
As great as the Serena Williams.
Tennis renowned, world player.
Serena Williams.
You wouldn't think.
You would not.
In a million years that something that, comes from her health would affect her.
Yeah.
Depending on her race. And so, you could see that whatever happened in the past is definitely touching.
Yeah.
Every little speckle of African American race, or even just minority groups.
Yeah, all minority groups can be affected by this, because usually the hospitals that minorities go to are not as well equipped because of the population of the place.
Because you could definitely assume that.
Yeah.
It wouldn't just be a target on African Americans.
No, yeah, it's all minorities.
Especially with the slaves, it wasn't just all African Americans.
No, it was also Irish immigrant women.
See,
yeah,
that's the thing. It's not just one certain race, and that's why you shouldn't be playing the race card, like I was saying.
Yeah.
Because everyone's being affected by this. We all should realize that it should be a cooperative effort to be more woken, I guess you could say, to the.
Yes.
I guess you could say.
Yes.
To the things that are going on.
Yeah.
In America today, and to the things that happened in the past.
Do you have any final thoughts on your book, on this video, on what you got from your book?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I have some final thoughts. I think the biggest takeaway from this book and your book would be that you could definitely see, and we could repeat this over and over, and it's a cliche, but things aren't perfect.
Yeah.
Definitely between races. And I'd like to say that it's not because of our parents or even the previous parents, our grandparents and stuff like that. I'd like to think that it's because we haven't formed a connection between people and a foundation of understanding. I think I definitely want to, implement God on this because, it's what we believe in, it's what we're here for. And Kiese Laymon definitely references God a few times in his book, especially because his grandmother was very religious sometimes. But I'd just like to say that the biggest takeaway would be, in the graces of God, we should definitely look at what makes us more like each other instead of what makes us different.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing that I could see from my book. I definitely I'd love to hear what you have to say. Your biggest takeaway from your book.
I feel like this is a step in the right direction. The fact that just like colleges like SPU are taking the time to teach students about the past and just being aware of like the history behind medicine and like how we got here. And I feel like since like we're the future doctors, I feel like it will just impact the way that we practice medicine and just being aware of that and just being conscious of the past, because like once you know history, you learn from your mistakes and you try not to let history repeat itself. So I feel like now that we know what we know, it's just gonna change our outlook on medicine, and it's gonna change our outlook in medicine, and not just medicine, but when it's tied to race too.
I definitely agree. I think we should address the audience, just like about the book. I don't know if you have any notes on your book, like something they should be aware of when reading it.
When reading the book,
like anything that you would have liked to know before you read it.
Oh yeah, so my book, the introduction doesn't really compare to what the content. It doesn't compare to the content of the book itself. Because when I was reading the introduction, I was just getting bored. I don't want to say bored, but like I would just kept losing interest and just like getting distracted, because my author makes a lot of emphasis on the fact that like white physicians took advantage of underprivileged populations.
Okay.
But I just kept losing interest because it wasn't personal to me. But then at the beginning of the first chapter, she's like this woman, and I was like, oh, now I'm interested, because now like we're talking about people. In the introduction, she talks about like the concept itself like as a whole, and in the first chapter, like she just hooked me in with the first story.
Okay.
What about you?
I definitely like to tell the audience and whoever's listening, they stick to the Kiese Laymon definitely sticks to this title.
It's heavy.
It's heavy, yeah. There is some very explicit language sometimes. Some very detailed imagery of some sexual abuse that happened.
Yeah.
Also, just really, how do I explain? Situations where he knows things are bad, and it's just hard for the reader to read it.
Yeah.
Because it's real life, it happened, and just he explains emotions and things that happen to him in such a like accurate and relatable form that I think the reader should be very conscientious before reading the book. That you need to have a right mindset of before going into the book, because you can be confused or even like kind of be taken back by how much this book is really about, about the bigger picture, even though it comes from like several small perspectives. So yeah, I think that's it. It was nice hearing what you had to say about medical bondage. I appreciate everything that you said. I also think that it was very insightful that you had the example from Serena Williams.
Yeah. The GOAT.
I very much appreciate your thoughts and your insight into the book. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you too. And one last question, would you read your book again?
I definitely would.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely would.
That's how you know it's a good book, when you would be willing to read it again.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
And thank you to the audience.
Yes. Thank you for watching our video. I hope you'll have a blessed day, night, or morning. So, see ya.
God bless you.
Yeah.